Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we are talking about how perfectionism is holding back your leadership. And we know loads of you will probably be thinking, yes, that's me. I'm a perfectionist. And it is honestly one of the most common things that our clients say about themselves. And usually it's with a mix of pride and frustration. And I think the thing is with most perfectionists, they know they probably need to ease up a bit. And you've likely had that feedback before if you're a bit of a perfectionist, but knowing that you should dial it back and actually feeling ready to let go, they're completely different things. And because perfectionism has got you to where you are now, the thought of lowering your standards feels super risky. But what if the very thing that helped you climb the ladder is now holding you back from the impact that you really want? And that is what we are exploring today. As usual, let's get into it. And Jahi, tell us why perfectionism feels really useful to lots of people.
This is such a common topic for my clients. And I think what I see time and time again is people feel like perfectionism helps them to perform. They feel like when I'm a perfectionist, I deliver to a high standard. So that's helpful to my performance. And often that has come about because in the early part of their career, it perhaps was. So when you are a subject matter expert in the early stages of your career and the stuff that you're involved in is quite separate and discrete. It's not big cross functional projects that have an impact on the big part or the whole organization. Then having high standards and being prepared to work hard can help you get noticed because the standard of what you turn out is really good. People notice it. You get that positive feedback loop where people are telling you, oh, this is great work. They seem surprised. So I think it comes from that stage of the brain gets this idea that turning out something that's perfect or nearly perfect is what other people want. And so we feel like perfectionism is what's going to allow us to continue to do that and continue to perform at a high level. But once you get to a more senior level, the opposite is true. It gets in the way rather than helping.
Yeah, and it's a funny one as well, isn't it? Because what feels like perfection for you might not be perfection for someone else. So you can spend all of that time trying to create this perfect thing, trying to deliver in this perfect way. And actually, you might not be hitting the mark for someone else. So sometimes all of that hard work and effort is actually overlooked. And then you're left there feeling burnt out and frustrated because you're like, I put so much effort into that. It was perfect. But it's a funny thing, isn't it, perfectionism? Because we get so caught up in it, don't we? And I think if it felt helpful to us at one stage, it's when it starts getting in the way, it's like, how do I move away from this? Because I know my own self. I hate for people to spot mistakes. And when I'm doing things, I want to deliver and I want to deliver 100%. And I want people to know that I'm delivering 100%. But then the thought of somebody spotting something that's not quite right or maybe below standard, that fills me with absolute dread. And it's like, how can you still deliver and feel comfortable with it and almost start to move past that thing of it needs to be perfect?
It's interesting hearing you describe that because I think that will really strike a chord. It's that idea that someone else is going to spot something that you're going to kick yourself for, that you could have done, that you did know that, but you just missed it. That's the bit where people feel the sting of that emotion of, that's so annoying. I could have got that right. And so, in trying to avoid that, you're striving for perfection. But then what you're doing is spending more time, more energy. And in reality, the person who's pointed out something, they've just said it and it's gone and it's done for them. Like they
Mm.
haven't got all the emotion attached to that small little thing that they've noticed that you haven't done perfectly. That's your baggage, it's not theirs. So they're not expecting perfect every time. And so to them, there's no emotional attachment to pointing out something. And generally, people are going to be doing that because it's, oh, but what about this? Or you could have done that, or this isn't quite right. Most of the time, those things are low stakes things. The things that you kick yourself over, they're things that then seem obvious in hindsight. So you don't want that emotion of someone pointing out something because that hits the ego, it hits how you feel about yourself. And so then you put all this energy into avoiding that feeling. And then that takes more time, more energy, more effort. And it's all in service of this thing that actually that other person didn't really, it didn't affect their impression of you. It didn't make them think that you're no good at your job. And actually they felt like they probably felt like they were being helpful with pointing it out.
Yeah, and I suppose it's the embarrassment and the shame, isn't it, that hits hard. And it's like when that happens, it can feel really hard to get past that because it just keeps playing out in your mind over and over again, doesn't it? And you start kicking yourself even harder and you're like, why didn't I notice that? Why didn't I spot that? And then you put all of this pressure on yourself. So I suppose, and that's just me that I'm talking about here. But I'm sure that there's lots of our listeners that are going to relate to that because it's a tough situation to get yourself in, but you can overcome it and you can move through it. You can recognize the signs. So let's talk about how perfectionism shows up in leadership.
Yeah, this is a conversation I've been having a lot recently with clients. So I think there are a number of signs, and often the first one and the one that is most detrimental to the individual is overwork. So when you are a perfectionist, you will often take on what in theory is doable, but in reality, because of this really high standard that you set, means that you're taking on more than what your capacity will allow you to do and maintain your sanity and well-being. So, whether that is reworking every word of every report or PowerPoint deck, whether that is overthinking every email that you're going to send, or taking 20 minutes, half an hour to write what could have been a 2-line email, all of those things add up and they deplete your energy and your attention and your ability to focus. So you just reach that point where you're absolutely exhausted and just pushing yourself to carry on through, working longer hours. We've talked about it on our episodes previously about burnout, but that kind of like heavy ambition combined with a perfectionist drive is often the early stage that, if left unchecked, can progress towards burnout. So I think that's the biggest one. Another one that can often come up is, as a result of that, there can be a real challenge in actually maintaining the pace. A lot of organizations want to be agile. You hear all these buzzwords flying about the place. They want to move on things quickly. They want projects to work. And if you are a perfectionist, you might want to hold off on decisions, make sure that everything is dotted, crossed, not move on something unless it's absolutely perfect. That can really reduce the number of things that you can move on at the same time, the pace that you can move on things. So it can result in slowing the pace because you don't have capacity for everything when the standard is so high. And it can have a massive impact when you're leading teams. This is a huge one. And I hesitate to use the word micromanaging, but I think people will recognize in themselves, if they're perfectionists, that they often will struggle to delegate. So they will feel like I could do it better, I could do it quicker. They will feel like I want to, in theory, delegate, but actually then I've got to have it back and I've got to check it before it gets shared. So that's not really delegating. If it's coming back to you for you to approve and check, that's not really delegating. So yeah, I think that probably is some of the biggest ones that I see coming up.
Yeah, and it's interesting hearing you talk about micromanagement there because when we speak to clients who are having issues around micromanaging their teams and how to create more trust and how to delegate more effectively, it does come back around to that perfectionist trait, doesn't it? And it's interesting because you think you're delegating and then you're bringing all of the work back for you to quality check it because you feel like it's your reputation that's at stake because you're leaning into that perfectionism trait. And it becomes really difficult, doesn't it? And you do just get to the point where you're so burnt out and you're thinking, why can't this team just, or why can't these individuals work like me? Why can't they just produce the work at the same standard that I would produce it? And I think that realization that you're never going to get 100% from someone, they're never going to work in the same way as you, they're never going to think in the same way as you. And do they really need to? Does that work need to be perfect, or does it just need to be done and out the door? And I suppose if you're feeling this will have a knock-on effect on my reputation, what can you put in place to make sure that they're ticking those boxes, to make sure that the information's correct? And then if the information's correct, it's one of those situations, isn't it, where you're like, it's got the right information. It might not be exactly how I'd do it, but it's going out and it's right. And that's someone else's take on it. That's somebody else's work, someone else's effort. And we're going to run with that because I can't do everything. And it's such a huge mindset shift, isn't it? Like I always found that, like when I was managing bigger teams, you can't do everything, and you can try to at the start and you get burnt out. And it's just giving people that free rein, but also making sure that you can provide the feedback, that you can provide that training and support up front so that they know what the expectations are, they know what they're delivering to, they're not just left to their own devices. I always feel like that can help.
It absolutely it can. And I think often when you do that, you find that it's not as scary as you thought it might be. So I've consistently seen that pattern, that when people shift their approach slightly and just loosen a little bit and ask someone else to deliver, they often find A, the standard is better than they expected, and the total capacity is greater because it's not just relying on your own capacity. And they find that often, oh, that person did a better job than I was expecting. That person probably stepped up more than I was expecting. And I think I was having this conversation just yesterday, interestingly, with someone that said, actually, I've recognized if they can get to 70 or 80% of what I would be able to deliver, that's fine. It can just go to that other person. And I think it's also that element of reminding yourself that you can still have checks and balances in place. You can still have a high standard. That doesn't mean you have to be involved in every step of the way. And people will surprise you. They will do things their way rather than your way, but they will be invested in it. They will put more of themselves into the work because they feel trusted to deliver.
Yeah, and one of the key things that I learned is that done is better than perfect, and that is the only way that you're going to move forward with the business priorities, but also with your own career progression. Because if you're stuck in the day to day, if you've got your head down in all of the work that you're doing, all of the work that your team's doing, and you're trying to churn out all of this perfect stuff, you won't be as effective, and you'll put your own career progression on the back burner because you're so invested in the day to day that your own stuff will go on the back burner. And then in the future, that is going to have a huge knock on effect for you.
It's not just your own stuff. I completely agree with that element where people don't necessarily then have time for their own learning, development, progression. They're repeating what they already know and doing it really well rather than developing new or different skills. So that's absolutely an element of it. But also, perfectionism means that you're less able to do some of the other things outside of that that would support your career progression. You probably don't invest time and energy in expanding your network, in some of those other elements of developing. You might hold back from being the one to share an idea because you haven't got it perfect in your own head yet, so you can't put it out there half formed and then somebody else jumps in and they come up with the idea and they're seen as the one. But I think the really crucial element is when you're a perfectionist, you reduce your capacity to be involved in higher level, more strategic stuff. You reduce your capacity to support your boss or to get involved beyond your current remit, or even at the level that your current remit requires, because you're so stuck in the weeds. And so when you look at the very top of organizations, C-suite people are generally not perfectionists, because to be able to operate with the span of control and the level that those people are at, especially in larger organizations, you can't be involved in all of the day to day. You can't be involved in all of the doing. You've got to have been able to develop that skill to step back, step away, and trust other people and find ways to enable other people to deliver rather than be the doer. So I think it's that element in particular. You will not be perceived as a next level person if you are still operating in the weeds.
Yeah, and that's so true, isn't it? Because I suppose what we're talking about here are actually the hidden costs of being a perfectionist. And while you're stuck in the weeds, you're missing out on doing all of the strategic work where you can really make an impact and move things forward. So I suppose if people are in this situation now and they're listening to this episode today, how can they start loosening that grip, especially if they're listening now and they're thinking, I know there's an element of perfectionism that is creeping in, or I'm in the thick of it. What can they do about it?
So, a conversation I often have when people are in this boat is to understand what has driven your relationship with perfectionism. What is it that has created this habit? And then to consider, what habit do I want to develop instead? Because your brain develops habitual ways of thinking and acting. And over time, if you have developed this habit, it is going to be tricky to let it go. It's going to require practice. And ironically, for a perfectionist, it's very hard to do things imperfectly. So to practice not being a perfectionist and not be that good at it can be really tricky. So I think the first thing is defining what the standard is. So I will talk about what is the alternative to perfect, what would be excellent, what would be good, what would be good enough. And when you start to define an alternative standard, or to really consider, with this project or with this thing, what does this look like? And I think it goes back to what you were saying of done is better than perfect. You can say that to yourself, but your brain's not going to believe it when you're still caught in the perfectionist trap. But you can say, okay, maybe there are some things where done is better than perfect. So I might not adopt it as a full principle yet, but where are there some things where I could define a different standard? Where are there some things where I could adopt that stance?
Yeah, I love that. And I suppose as well, there's that element of modeling the vulnerability, isn't there? Like showing your team that it's okay to share work in progress, that we don't have to deliver all of this perfect stuff, but we need to be working in a way that is moving the business and our own development forward. So, what specific things can people try? And I know we're going to provide a download with this episode as well with some additional things, but what things, if people are listening today, could they go away and try?
So I think there's a few, but I before I go into those, I think the one that I really want to emphasize is that mindset shift. Before you take on board these practical steps that we're going to share, a question that I think can be really useful to ask yourself is, what's the risk if this isn't perfect versus what's the risk if I use my energy to try and make it perfect? Because when you bring your brain away from the emotion and into the logic, and that's what that question will help you do, then you will find a very different answer than if you go down that habitual path. So I think address your mindset initially, but then I think in terms of really practical steps, the first one I would say is have a time limit for things. You will find when you're a perfectionist that you will normally, or often in my experience, get your head down and do stuff and find that it takes way longer. And when you look back, you'll recognize how much time you've spent. But when you're in it, you're away on that and using time. So have a time limit for certain tasks and then stick to it. So if you're going to work on a presentation, for example, instead of I'm going to fiddle with every slide, I'm going to change the fonts, I'm going to add one bullet point or change one word here. If you're creating it, give yourself a time limit, for example, of an hour and a half, 2 hours. You know the scope of the presentation and who it's for, but just stick to it religiously and do not let yourself go over that time limit. When the timer goes off, that's it, you're done. Stop. And the more you can practice having a time limit where you're like, yep, that is what that task is worth, and practice sticking to it. You won't hit it every single time from the start, but the more you can practice that and the closer you can get, you'll surprise yourself how quickly that can start to force you to focus on the most important stuff and getting that 80% rather than just letting it take the time it's going to take.
Amazing. And I think just as you were talking there about creating presentations, I was thinking we've all been there, haven't we? When it's like, when it's an interview or it's a board presentation or it's something that you need to get right, and you can literally stress over the font, the bullet points, like you just drive yourself insane, and you can easily spend a day or two just trying to perfect it and make it look right. And it is that the most important thing. So I absolutely love that tip there, to time it, and once the time's done, it's done. So if it's not finished, you're in trouble at that stage. So is there anything else then that people can do?
Yeah. So I think when you're delegating, you can change the conversation you have when you're delegating something. So if you're a perfectionist, there can be a habit of, I'd like you to do this task, and giving some detailed instructions or a steer of, this is how I would approach it, do this. So instead of that, delegate the outcome rather than the process. So I need a proposal that's going to convince the board to invest this much in this project, or I need the data pulling together that's going to support me delivering this presentation. It needs to do this and this. What questions have you got? So let that person ask the questions or share how they are planning to approach it, rather than you sit down and give them a whole shopping list of instructions for how they should approach it. And you will get such a different response and outcome when you start to delegate in that way.
Yeah, and I suppose that links into that good enough definition, doesn't it? So before you start any task, if you just write down in one sentence, if you're just given that overview of what good enough looks like in this specific situation, and what do they need to do to tick the minimum amount of boxes, you can refer back to that then when you've got the urge to take over or to start checking. You can really stop yourself. You can pause and you can go, okay, what did I say good enough look? Because sometimes we just get so stuck in things that we forget, and things have moved on and you've had different thoughts around things. So I really like that as well. So is there any other things? And obviously we'll put the downloads in with a few more on, but is there anything else that you want to add?
There's absolutely loads. So I think there's probably 20 or so specific suggestions on the download. But yeah, a particular one that I really want to highlight is an early feedback loop. So, what perfectionists will often do is they will be seeking that ta-da moment where they're going to get all the positive feedback because they've done everything, they've presented it, and other people have now seen it and they get all of this. Oh, that's amazing work. You've done really well. The brain loves the positive feedback, but a perfectionist, therefore, will often wait till the end and seek feedback at that point and overwork to get to that point. Whereas what they can do is to share work in progress and get input. So, this is my first draft. What am I missing? This is something that I've been working on to do this. Is this the shape that you were expecting? Is there anything else that you'd like me to include? And what that will do is give you greater insight, because often whoever's briefed you or asked you for something, going back to what we were saying about delegation, will have in their minds a picture of what they will consider to be good enough or a great job. And if you share and get feedback early, it's going to feel vulnerable because it might be in a totally wrong direction. But then the risk is you're going to spend all that effort covering every possible base, and actually you don't need to. In the early stages, on your rough drafts, on your ideas, rather than get to that ta-da moment and get it fully perfect before you share. It will feel weird, but it will really reduce and give you guardrails that will help you to not waste energy on unnecessary bells and whistles that other people are not going to value or not going to think is important. And it will stop you overthinking, have I got every base covered? Because you'll get that guidance and you'll know whether you're covering the bases that people want covered.
Yeah, I can almost feel that all of the perfectionists that are listening absolutely freaking out inside at the thought of that. And it is definitely something that you need to work on. It's not one day I'm a perfectionist, the next day I'm not. It's an evolving process, isn't it? You've got to trust yourself. You've got to put things in place to allow you to trust your team and support your team to deliver. And I suppose we should probably even mention the one touch rule as well before we finish. And when you're delegating something, it is really about resisting that urge to just quickly check it and review it and improve it, isn't it? Because it can, if your team share things with you that you've delegated to them, it can be so tempting to just go, oh, I've just spotted this and I'm just going to quickly do this and I'm just going to reword that. But the knock-on effect of that is huge, because if people are submitting something for that first check, they just want to know, am I on the right lines? This is not the finished article. Am I on the right lines? And if you start changing it and improving it, reworking it, red penning it, crossing it out, it can really deflate that person, can't it? And like I've been in that situation myself with a real micromanager and like senior leader. And it's difficult and you do feel deflated and it can really demotivate you in your role, can't it?
It can. I think it goes one of two ways. You either feel deflated and demoralized because you thought that you'd done a good job and then your boss is then changing it to make it more like they would have done it. Or the other thing is that as a team member, why should I bother to try and deliver something that I think is my best work? Because you're only going to red pen it anyway. So actually, I'm not going to put that much effort in, or I'm not going to worry too much about checking it because I know that you're going to cover that off anyway. And I had a conversation recently with somebody where they used to review stuff that was submitted for internal comms. So rather than actually let their team members write it and it go out, it used to come back to them for them to check. And that was a real challenge for him to step away from that and not check. Felt so odd. But actually, once it was done, oh, yeah, why was I checking it? Because it's fine. It does the job. It's good enough. Yeah, I think people will freak out at the idea of doing these, but then once you do them, you'll often find that actually the difference that you'll feel from doing it will encourage you to continue and do it more.
Yeah, I love that. So there you have it. There's some practical ways that you can start loosening that perfectionist grip without feeling like you're dropping your standards. And I think the key thing is to remember that this isn't about lowering the bar. It's about putting your energy where it actually makes a difference. And I think the reality of this is that breaking those perfectionist habits does take some practice and it can feel genuinely uncomfortable at first. And it's a bit like learning to drive on the other side of the road. It's the right thing to do, but it just doesn't feel natural. I don't think it ever will when it comes to driving on the other side of the road. But when it comes to perfectionism, I think you can definitely work on it. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I know I need to do this, but I'm struggling to make it stick, or if perfectionism is showing up in other areas of your leadership that we haven't covered today, then coaching might be exactly what you need, because sometimes having someone in your corner to help you spot the patterns and to really hold you accountable to new ways of working can make all the difference. And both of us work with leaders one to one to help them break through exactly these kinds of barriers. So if you'd like to explore whether coaching could help, all you need to do is drop us an email or get in touch through our website, and we would love to have a conversation about what's going on for you. And as usual, we will be back next week with another episode. And in the meantime, try one of these strategies and let us know how you get on, because we genuinely love hearing from you about what's working and what you're struggling with. So we'll see you back here next week.